Welcome to City Cinematheque, where the art and pleasure of the movies are the subject of serious discussion. I'm your host, Jerry Carlson, and I teach film studies at the City College of the City University of New York. Today, it's our pleasure to offer the 2004 Canadian production, How to Conquer America in One Night. It's written and directed by Dany Laferrière, a writer of Haitian origin, and the film explores, perhaps surprisingly, in a comic manner, the Haitian diasporic community in Montreal. It's a delightful film, it's a wise film in a number of ways, and we're proud to present it. After today's screening, we'll have as a guest Professor Michael Dash from New York University, a noted expert on Haitian literature and Haitian diasporic culture. Now, take a voyage into Montreal and its Haitian community in How to Conquer America in One Night. Welcome back to City Cinematheque. And we've just seen a film, very traditional in one sense, sealed with a kiss. A happy ending, perhaps. We'll talk about that and a number of other things in the 30 minutes coming up. It's a pleasure to have returning to City Cinematheque Professor Michael Dash from New York University. Michael is a noted expert on the arts and literature of the French Caribbean. He's written on my colleague here, actually, at the CUNY Graduate Center, the distinguished Martinican novelist and theorist Edouard Glissant, and has published several books on Haiti, its relationship with the United States, its native customs and culture. Welcome back, Michael.
Thank you very much, Jerry.
Good. Now, you've, as an expert on things Haitian, you have spent some time thinking about Dany Laferrière, the director and screenwriter of this particular film. But he's much more than that. Tell us a little bit about who this character, I mean, this really cultural provocateur as well as distinguished artist, Dany Laferrière is.
Yes. Well, as you say, he's a provocateur, and he's very much that. And he appears in this film as well, of course. So there's as much a sort of send-up of himself, and probably that tells you a whole lot about Dany Laferrière, because I think that the thing that he fears most is a kind of pontificating intellectual, and that kind of person, he's quite prepared to send himself up, you know, in that regard. But he has an interesting kind of trajectory. He comes to writing very late. He does not write a single book or anything creatively until he leaves Haiti.
Okay. That's
very interesting. So he's born in the early 50s. And curiously, of course, his life is intersecting with politics all the time. And in this politics never seem to play a big role in his books or in the movies, but it's always there, and it is key to resolving how things work or do not work out. People would have seen recently Heading South, for instance, and Heading South, it doesn't seem to be about politics. It seems to be about delusion. It seems to be about desire, the way lives intersect. And suddenly you realize it's politics that eventually resolves everything. You know, that's where the
you can't remove yourself from it.
Right.
One of the traditions of Hollywood film, not every Hollywood film, but one of the traditions is that the individual can somehow remove himself or herself from the forces of history and politics. And one of the things that happens in many internationals and it works is the way in which these things are intertwined. They're inseparable and they influence. And so he's part of that tradition.
And indeed, his own life is like that, because very early he's sent to his grandmother in Petit Goave. He talks a lot about Petit Goave and he says, I'm a citizen of Petit Goave. He's not a citizen of Haiti, he's a citizen of Canada, he's a citizen of Petit Goave. When Duvalier comes to power, because the idea is to keep him out of the Port-au-Prince and the center of what is beginning to go wrong. So he gets sent to this kind of idyllic childhood away from Port-au-Prince with his grandmother. And in the meantime, his father runs afoul of the Duvalier regime and is exiled.
Okay.
So the father is exiled by Duvalier père. He comes back as a young man to Port-au-Prince. He says it's in Port-au-Prince he realized he was Haitian. He didn't realize he was Haitian in Petit Goave. It was Port-au-Prince. And he works as a journalist. And one of his very close friends is killed by thugs tied to Duvalier fils, the son, Baby Doc, who is very close, the guy gets killed is very, very close to him. So the thing is that he has to leave Haiti now. Right. So he keeps saying it's his father exiled by the father, and now the son exiles him. So his life is very closely intertwined with politics. And when he comes to Montreal, really where he goes, keeps saying it's very interesting that he went to Montreal and not to Paris or someplace like that, because what's interesting about Dany Laferrière is that it is post-colonial. It's not about settling the scores with France or anything like that. We're beyond that. We are now moving into a different kind of relationship with the outside world, and that's where he claims he bought this Remington typewriter, which has become this kind of iconic object on which he types. Very interestingly, types the novels, because he says, if I would write them, it's part of the myth of his writing.
It's the mythology,
Yeah, but what he actually said once to me was that when you write, if you wrote with a pen, for instance, if you wrote that way, the French that would emerge would be a sort of lyrical French, would be a French that is, for him, not acceptable for describing his life and the new world in which French must function. When he writes on a typewriter, it comes out totally differently. And he says he wants to produce Polaroid pictures. That's the exact image he used of the world that he lives in. He says the world we live in now is a world in which you take Polaroid pictures. They must be rapid, they must happen very quickly, it must be abrupt, and so on. And that's a writing that you get on the Remington typewriter. So the first book became this succès de scandale, How to Make Love to a Negro Without Getting Tired, which and this comes up in this film as well, the question of comedy. I mean, he uses outrageous comedy to talk about extremely serious issues. It's about race, it's about authorship, about literary objectives and things like that. Afterwards, he produced a cycle of 10 novels called his American Autobiography, which begins in Petit Goâve and ends with a return to Haiti. And he decided after that he would write no more literature. That's it. I mean, he just draws a line and he says it will be exclusively cinema from now on. So the film How to Conquer America in One Night is his production. There's another one called Le Goût des Jeunes Filles, which is also his, and of course Heading South is based on 3 of his stories. So that kind of gives you a sort of general picture of him coming to literature late, then deciding to leave it and move on to another form that he thinks is at least as appropriate as literature, if not more so, for describing the Americas and the new sort of world of someone who is a migrant, yet sort of circulating freely between cultures and so on.
Well, I have to say that, there are many distinctive features of the film that we've just seen, but one of them, and I don't mean this to be a backhanded compliment, is that for, a filmmaker, mind you, mature as an artist, but new to this particular craft, this is a particularly well-made a film. We don't have a sense of there being any amateur behind this. This is not only well scripted and well acted, but it's a kind of model of how to use limited locations and limited resources. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, this is the thing that takes place in rooms, and it takes place, in taxis, mobilely, but there's not very much more than that in terms of budget. And it has also I think in terms of acting, quite a convincing and distinguished cast, but it's a very limited one. I mean, there's really no more than 10 to a dozen characters we have anything to do with in the film. And that way, I have to say the film follows almost while it's very cinematic, it follows a near dramatic model, of limited sets and lots of talking interaction. Now, has he said anything more about whether or not he simply thinks that prose fiction has been repositioned somehow in culture, and it's better for him to be moving on to film, or do we know why he's sort of made this?
Well, I think. To use one of his expressions again, he said what he wanted to do in his writing, especially the American Autobiography, those 10 novels, was to create what he called a sociologie de brousse, a kind of a rough kind of sociological picture
Right.
of the world as he saw it, which meant that a lot of the qualities we associate with literature, what we call literariness,
Right.
Those qualities are inappropriate for a sociologie de brousse,
Okay.
as he calls it. And his novels have moved increasingly towards the cinema. In fact, from the very beginning, they were always visual. These short chapters, very, very short chapters, which became eventually almost like snapshots.
Okay.
Snapshots. And in the last of the or towards the end of the cycle of the American Autobiography, you find increasingly that the snapshots don't hold together. They don't fit together. So, for instance, let me give you an example. Pays Sans Chapeau is called Land Without a Hat. It's about him going back to Haiti. And he goes back to Haiti and he says, I have to, as if we all expect him to be a kind of intermediary to explain Haiti to us. So he arrives in Haiti. He says, I go to Carrefour, which is kind of teeming area just outside of Port-au-Prince. And he sets up his typewriter. And he says, I can feel everything around me so sort of pressing in on me that I can't really write full sentences. So
Okay.
I see a child pass, I write child. I see a ball go by, I write ball. So life comes in those random sort
Okay.
of snippets. And the entire book is like that. And it's divided into these sections called the dreamt of land and the real land. And you find after a while there's no difference between the real land and in fact sometimes you're thinking it's alternating, and at one point it doubles. And so he keeps playing games with the reader.
Okay.
As if saying to the reader, you always want the writer to tell you what is going on, to sort of be the intermediary for you. I'm not going to play that role. I'm going to in fact challenge you to look beyond me at what is going on and probably try to work it out for yourself.
Well, that's a very interesting point because we can, in a certain sense, loop back into the film that way because the film has in it what I'll call a couple of trapdoors. That is, the characters, for example, Guégué and Fanfan, talk to one another about how they, as taxi drivers at different points, are following exactly what you've settled. The expectation of their clients is that they will serve as these great mediators, and that after a while, they understand that this is, in essence, a kind of staged dialogue of cliches, and they can even point towards the moments in which certain phrases will either be introduced by the client or in which, in virtually a call and response manner, the client says something and is expecting a particular response from the Haitian taxi driver, which then sort of leaves us, if we have used those cliches ourselves, it sort of leaves us floating. Well, if we can't say that, where do we go from here?
Absolutely.
And he's very interested in that. Where do we go from here?
Yeah. And even the big questions, where are you from? And the answer is, if it's Thursday, I am from wherever he said, Sweden or something like that.
Right.
So he keeps sending up those. But yes, I think, and that's exactly, I think you've just pointed to one of the great strengths of Dany Laferrière. These insights that come at us in such an unassuming and unexpected way. These are not, you're not banged over the head with this point, but it's there. And if you think about it seriously, it really has a deeper meaning attached to it.
Right. Well, that's also something you were talking about a little bit earlier that I think is worth underlining, that there's a number of narrative modes that people use to talk about stories of diaspora or emigration or exile. And one must say that comedy is not the preferred mode, because obviously we're living in a world in which there are literally hundreds of millions of people on the move around the globe, and I think the tendency is to use narrative or dramatic modes that tend towards anywhere from the tragic to the serious, and then here he goes over and pushes it in this other direction, even using you might say some of the near theatrical traditions of the symmetries of romantic comedy that you get in this film. I mean, we have a crisscross of people moving from country to country, but we have, at least formally, we have the reunion of two couples at the end of the film. But there's a tension between what he's portraying about diasporic life and also the how shall I put it, the discontents of the developed world as well, and the form of the comedy.
Yeah. Well, I think that the two things. I mean, first of all, someone said recently to me, you know, if all you have is a hammer, everything you see is a nail, which means that you keep banging away at things. Whereas in Laferriere's case, he's so interested in the story behind the story. He's so interested in the ironies that come about because of all of these cross-cultural encounters that we have now. He's really so interested also in a form which is not inflated or pedantic or overly didactic, that for him, the only form that works really is comedy. But it's comedy which always has that other edge to it. So you look at the film and you think of some of the situations, you realize there's another side that is being pointed to, but always in an indirect kind of way. For instance, in this film, you have these two lives that intersect, but among other things, but the life of Gégé and Fanfan, his uncle. Right. And you never know who is right. Gégé is right to some extent because he says, I'm fed up of the world I live in. I'm tired of seeing the same people. I'm tired, you know, I want new, I want something new. Okay, so new so that you understand, but new expresses itself as a centerfold. You see what I mean? It's sort of ridiculous in that sense, you know. And Fanfan says to him, 20 years from now, I wonder what you'll be saying, because it's 20 years that Fanfan has been in Canada. You see what I mean? So you really are then meant to think about, you know, you have all this sort of infectious vitality of Gégé. He's really an incredibly captivating character. But you say to yourself, I wonder if this is not a tragedy in the making, or I wonder if there isn't sadness at the end of this route. You know, it's not going to be as interesting as the arrival, because the arrival has all of that sort of new discovery and so on. So that's a big moment. With Fanfan, he turns it the other way. He says, well, instead of wanting newness, suppose you yearned for what was old, and you remain frozen in time. So you have Rosaline in this yellow dress. Yellow is one of these signature colors for Laferrière. It means desire. It has a kind of erotic charge for him. So she's in this yellow dress, you know, always somewhere there in memory, in this, you know, sort of faded, fuzzy thing that he keeps remembering. Of course, we all know at some point he's going to go there and find that everything has changed. In fact, she suffered a horrible death. Indeed. You know, in prison and all of that sort of thing. So here you have the counter to Gégé, who is now shown to be wrong in a sense for yearning for something which is gone, but yet his very humanity is tied to that yearning, because, as he said, in Port-au-Prince, I was a poet, even if I was hungry. Now I'm well fed, but I'm a taxi driver.
That's right.
Probably also making the literature, the link between the writer and the taxi driver again. But and so his humanity is actually tied to it, and he is taught a lesson at the end of the film, because the yellow dress comes back. Indeed. But on someone else. You see, so it sort of comes around.
No, and one of the things I like about his construction is that there are these little moments that have all of these, you know, resonances in them. Just to take it from the side of the two couples and the way in which they're potentially mirrors of one another some 20 years later, all the enthusiasm of youth, of Gégé, with his arrival there, etc. Then we have the discussion of body image, and of this whole notion of the skinny, underdeveloped, but then the overweight, developed, and an innocent. All of that leads us up to a perfectly innocent but rich line, like the beautiful model who says, "I'm so happy, I've finally recovered my appetite. What I really want is a big plate of spaghetti right now. But then he'll cross-cut that with André arriving in Port-au-Prince with a lovely image of her, weaving her way through the market, crowd. And just as you're saying, this ambiguates the values, the sort of received values of so many things. Like why is it that the West, as Laferrière says, why is it that the West has now fetishized the slender woman for the last 100 years, when for centuries before that it was a very different version of that. Does one plate of spaghetti mean that she's going to, go south in a slightly different? But he puts all of these things into play so that we're made to look for the meaning and the value of each of these characters as they're struggling to define themselves, which is not a settled thing for anybody here.
Yeah, but I think also, part of what is touched on here is a question of an appetite for life. I mean, appetite works in various ways,
right.
Because even between the sisters, for instance, there's one who consumes in this absolute, and the other one does not consume, right? So you have the inhibition, and obviously Laferrière feels very strongly that it is this desire to consume the world that is part of what he's talking about. I mean, he himself is about not just limiting yourself to the diet of being a Haitian national, but being part of an American reality, as he calls it, where, in fact, in his autobiography, his 10 novels, I mean, one novel is a road novel that takes you from New York to Los Angeles. It crosses, not only through landscapes, but, cultural icons. Everything is there to be consumed. So the idea of this sort of precocious, profuse, I think that's where he's pushing us. And maybe the sadness of Fanfan. He's had the last meal, it's like the ultimate the height of his being in Canada, where he can consume in this way, but he can't consume anymore. So it's important for him to go back to Haiti, to sort of resolve other issues and maybe open his appetite for something else. And along comes, of course, a tasty meal, if you wish. But yes, exactly. And you're right in terms of body image. He gets this slender Gégé who says, I want a hamburger. Just give me anything, because I'm here to conquer America. And that conquer is as much one having to do with consuming as much as anything else.
Well, another way of looking or addressing the same issue is just this apartment of Fanfan's, where so much of the action takes place, and how it keeps being reinterpreted by different people in the film. For Fanfan, it is home by the sort of standards of glossy North American television, which is always all in the background, and this is the way we live here. It's always there. It's very modest. Yet, from Gégé's point of view, there's a marvelous scene in which he simply looks in the refrigerator and sees all of the things, which for us is a very modest, tiny little refrigerator, and then he has the conjugations of the word waste with the great, and I waste, therefore I am. And so the space is transformed in its meaning by whoever is interpreting or in the space. Or equally so, the sisters, the Tremblay sisters, talk about how well Fanfan has done. In 20 years, how much he's actually accomplished in this society, and it's one of the sisters' comments, in those 20 years, we haven't even been able to change apartments.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. But the other thing about that apartment is the accumulation in it. Those boxes, the boxes that are everywhere. And that must mean something as well, because what he's actually created there is his own universe. It's not just, this is not decor, is it? It's not,
no.
And it's as if the accumulation has as much to do with, because you notice there's Gégé notices it. It's incredible what he has. He has all kinds of food. He has sort of patterns for dresses. I mean, he has everything in there. Is it someone who is always ready to go back? Is it somebody who is, he says, winters are long, so therefore you need to have this accumulation of stuff. It's kind of interesting, and I think it's an interesting kind of sort of visual presentation of the immigrant who surrounds himself.
It's almost like he's archiving his own life in some way.
Absolutely.
He's archiving both his past because of these objects that come. We look when Gégé brings the book that the uncle had inscribed to him, how much that means, and that sort of leads us in, I think, to this world of objects he surrounds himself with, because they're all objects invested in a certain sense with experience or meaning. And you could almost say they're almost it's an archive of fetishes, the things that allow him to enter into different aspects of his experience as he's negotiated between the cultures.
Yes, and in fact, Dany once said, Laferriere once said, there are two big moments for the immigrant: departure and arrival. And I think that the film moves between those poles. The departure of Gégé and his arrival, and then the departure of Fanfan and his arrival, the sort of key moments in the film.
Well, I hate to tell you this, but we've arrived at our moment of departure because our time is up. If you'd like more information about this series, about City Cinematheque, or about CUNY TV in general, it should be no surprise if the place to get it is on the internet. Please visit our website, www.cuny.tv. You'll find click-ons for all of our programming, as well as ways to communicate with us, again, no surprise, by email. Once again, please visit us at www.cuny.tv. Michael, what a pleasure to have you here. 30 minutes flew by.
Absolutely.
And I look forward to the chance to chat with you about other films on other occasions. But please, thanks for bringing your wealth of knowledge about Haitian culture to us today.
And thanks for inviting me.
Great. And we hope that you join us again here on City Cinematheque as we stroll through the archives of film history. In any case, thanks for joining us today, and bye-bye for now.